first I want to introduce our speakers. Next to me is Doug Sleater, who is president of the Sleater Group. And next to Doug is Greg LaFollette, who is a strategic advisor with CPA.com. And Greg has the reputation of telling people he's retired, but then here he is, and that's just never going to happen. So co-anchoring this event with me, who's been hanging on for all 10 hours as well, is Alexandra DeFelice. Alexandra is Senior Manager of Moore Stevens North America. The name of this session is Taking Control of Your Practice in the 21st Century. And what we want to do is have Doug and Greg tell us about ways they have seen other accountants take control of their practices, tips that they might have for you, and things that they've seen accountants do wrong that can be corrected. The two of them have been around this profession for long enough to have seen a lot of different accounting practices, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So without further ado, we'd like them to dive in and tell us what's going on in the profession that our practitioners should know about, and roadblocks they've seen, and how our practitioners can get moving in the right direction.
Well, Gail, thanks for having us. This is going to be fun today. I'll kind of start because I'm even older than Doug, and I'm a lot older than you. So I have been doing this for a very, very long time. And we talked earlier today when we were planning this about what mistakes we see accountants make. I not only see them making them, but I have made them personally myself. And I think the first error that I made in practice, and I see lots of other people make in practice, is client acceptance. So when I first started practicing, we had a client acceptance policy that was, quite frankly, we accept all clients. And then all firms kind of go through this same life cycle. The second stage is we only accept clients that pay. And we were pretty clever. We moved to that stage pretty quickly. But where we made an error, and I think the profession as a group made an error back then, was the idea of who we're going to accept, and we pretty much looked at the last client coming in the door as incremental revenue. In other words, there was no additional cost to whatever it was that this person wanted. We had the capacity. We didn't have to add office space or staff to do one more client. So we'd take pretty much whatever walked in the door. And that's a huge, huge, huge mistake. But it takes somebody very strategic to say, I do have the time to do this, but I choose not to because it doesn't fit the strategy of what I'm trying to do here. It's not the right type of client, it's not the right type of work or something. And that's hard. It's especially hard when you're trying to establish a practice. And you have payroll next Thursday. Mm-hmm. And you have those kinds of issues. So am I right about that, Doug?
Yeah, well, you also often refer to, I'm going to use your words, you also took everybody within your same zip code at first.
Oh, absolutely.
And then you
the only people we had access to.
This is exactly right, which is really where I won't call those things mistakes, that you say it's a huge mistake. Today it would be to start a business, to start a practice with just accepting clients from your own zip code and anyone that just pays. There's so much disruption that has been happening in the whole world of doing business. Mm-hmm. And we have a slide that maybe we could bring up, number 3, if we could put up there. Actually, it's the number 4, I'm sorry. These big trends that are starting to change the world in which we practice. Mm-hmm. And so when in the old world, you go out and you go find the clients, you go to the chamber meetings, you go to the Rotary Club, and you get those clients. Right, and then and you couldn't be very choosy. Now, with all the disruption going on in terms of anytime, anywhere access to data, that's maybe an overused word now, but it's no less relevant. We can really, really begin to specialize and take advantage of the disruption going on in the world. Right. So
if you go to the very next slide, and I'll kind of explain my observation of how this works. a year ago or 2 years ago at CPA.com, we worked with Dr. Jeffrey Moore, who's written the Crossing the Chasm and business books, and a very well thought of business strategist. And Jeffrey helped us kind of lay out something that everybody kind of suspected, but it makes a lot of sense in what Doug was talking about the commoditization and the automation and stuff. So we've seen a huge amount of automation over the last 5 to 8 years. I mean, for a long time we traded keystrokes for dollars, and we did key punch, and we added services, but that's what we were doing. And now all of a sudden we're approaching no data entry at all. We've got data retrieval of everything. And so we've automated what a lot of practices has kind of built their world around. We automated that, so it became commoditized. And as soon as things are commoditized, the price goes down. And in order to survive, you have to differentiate.
Right.
So all of us are now out there trying to figure out, how do we differentiate? Well, we differentiate by specialization. And it just so happens that all of those other things that we talked about, the internet in general and all of the magic technologies, allow us to specialize in ways that we were never able to do before. Now, I don't have the geographical limitation of clients with a same first 3 digits of a zip code, because I can go anywhere if I've got the right tools to specialize, and I do. So I see firms now going out and becoming specialized, and we'll talk more about that because I think you have a really unique and a great view on that. But clients go out, or firms go out and specialize, and then as they specialize, they begin to optimize. They get their processes down. They get very good at what they're doing, and they optimize. And as they optimize, then what do? They automate, and
more.
then the whole cycle starts over again. So this isn't a destination. It's a journey, and it's something that happens over and over and over. But this idea of specialization, when we specialized in clients that paid, or clients that were on our main street, and now I see clients, firms specializing in much different ways. And you've got a really unique way of kind of talking about and describing how that works. There's a slide.
It's actually 18. We can go quickly to 18.
Okay. There you go.
We've kind of been developing what we call a lexicon of what we mean when we say specialize. So before I go into the deep depths of this slide, I just want to kind of pop out and say, one of the questions we're trying to help you wade through here is, what are the mistakes you may be making as a practice that you could avoid making if you just thought a little bit differently? So I want to start by saying you didn't make mistakes by starting with your zip code, but in the last 5 years, really, there has been just an explosion of disruptive technologies that allow us to do these things that before weren't possible. So let me just take you through this slide. You've got the vertical focus. So now we can really say, I'm a practice that's focused on medical, restaurant, real estate, retail. Those are some of the largest vertical markets out there.
Those are almost like niches.
Yeah, big niches.
Big areas.
Yeah, right. And then hyper vertical is just our point where if I'm medical in the big medical market, well, urgent care centers could be my particular specialty, or McDonald's franchisees in the restaurant. So it's an endless amount of specialization that you could actually do with different business types. And I think that's where you really begin to realize a differentiation, which is what you use, that takes you above just all the other CPAs in town or in the world. And frankly, all of the people in this hyper-vertical marketplace that are using your services and are happy, they're going to talk to each other because they have industry associations. So,
and that's where the magic is. This idea of hyper-verticalization is. Jeffrey Moore talks about that in some of the work that he's done for us is you have a hyper vertical market emphasis that is big enough to matter but small enough to control. So you see people out there, I know a practitioner who specializes in McDonald's franchises. That's all they do.
That's right.
And they do it day in and day out, and believe me, they know everything there is to know. They go up to Chicago to Hamburger University, and I mean, they know everything there is to know about McDonald's franchises. And when those people talk to each other, they say, call Bill because he's the one who knows this. And that's the magic. You know, it used to be they'd call somebody from their Rotary Club.
Do you know somebody?
Who knows somebody, and now you've got that, and their phone rings. That's where I see the magic in this stuff.
So we're seeing this trend with the verticalization or the hyper verticalization. Where are people doing things right? Like what are the 3 things you need to be doing if you want to be a vertical specialist? And what are some mistakes where they're doing if they're trying to be vertical but they're going down the wrong path?
Okay. So let me start on part of it, and Doug's got a great answer for the what I will call the flip side of it. When someone chooses if you're going to go out and set up a practice and say I'm going to specialize in McDonald's franchises, you may get very hungry because it takes a long time. So the idea is you figure out something that you like to do, something that you want to learn a lot more about, because debits and credits are pretty much debits and credits. Every client thinks their business is completely different, and frankly, they're not, until you get in the stuff beyond the accounting, and that's where the value is. So you find something that you like, and then you look at your client base and say, well, I've got 2 or 3. You go ask them for referrals. You begin to go to the industry meetings. You subscribe to the trade magazines, and all of a sudden, after a while, your phone starts to ring, and you become the go-to person in that world. Now, if you try to become the go-to person in construction, you can't be that because it's too big. But if you try to be the go-to person in something that's so narrow that there are only 5 people in the country doing it, then you don't have enough of a market. So you have to figure out what that market's going to be, limit your practice, and start being disciplined about what you're going to do and what you're going to take. And when that odd person comes in that says, I'm a Burger King franchise, you say, no, you go somewhere else, and I'll spend this time trying to find another McDonald's franchise or trying to find another jewelry store, whatever my, and I think this hyper verticalization at that level is really, really exciting. You've got it's a different view. In some ways, I think it's a better view of this horizontal vertical. That I think that's exciting.
We might bring the slide back up, but I want to address your question too. Let's just get this, just because I want to tie into what Greg just said there. On the far right of the slide, where there's sort of a different way to cut your verticalization, and that's by processes. So maybe I'm a POS and payments expert, and I can go across many business types with that and be referred in by a lot of people. Even, let's say, somebody specialized in restaurants would not know much about POS, although they should, but let's just pretend. They would call in the POS and payments person to help with those clients. And same with inventory control, payroll, IT security. There's a huge need still, even though we're doing so much cloud stuff. It'll never go away that we need to focus a lot on security and IT fundamentals. And some firms are really specializing it, have a department within the firm or an outside contractor that they really trust to bring into clients to help with that basic infrastructure stuff. So those are what I call the process and service focused specialization. It isn't a particular marketplace, it's not a hyper vertical, but it's a horizontal vertical, if you will. So
one thing I think this lets you do is if you go back to Greg's original statement of, a standard accounting practice is not to say no when someone walks in the door. And I think a lot of practitioners are at that level where it's a client, I'll take it. And then I'll figure out whether it was a good client or a bad one later on, and then I'll figure out what to do. But when they first come in, they take it, And then you were suggesting that actually it makes sense to move to a better step where you're a little bit pickier about the kinds of clients that you take. I think that's hard for some accountants because it's hard for them to say no and because they don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. And it's hard to say, no, I don't want to do your work because, you know, you look really disorganized and I have a feeling you'll be a pain. So, but when you do this, it's easier to say, I'm sorry, I can't take your work because you're Burger King and I'm McDonald's or whatever. And so it's easier to turn away the clients that maybe aren't going to be the perfect fit if you define what that perfect fit is.
Right. And you begin, the flip side of that is you begin to attract the people that do fit. And Doug, it strikes me as I'm looking at the list of process and service stuff, that's precisely the list that a traditional full-service accounting firm would say, we offer these services. We do, we do audit, we do tax, we do MAS, we do all of these things. And now the really smart people are saying, we're gonna focus, and we can go out and hire these special people when we need them. And the POS person is saying, we're gonna focus, so the whole world is becoming more core and less general. Is that fair?
Yeah, and there's the big trend that has been going on for some time with going back to when open source software came about. And it's this whole sharing economy we have where people are collaborating much more and using their own unique skill sets to help each other, often for free, which blows you away when you think about that. But they make more money by doing so much more for each other for free. And it's a very interesting phenomena that happens. For the profession, the way I see that going on, the Sleater Group, my company, we have 800 members all over the world who are helping small businesses with many of these processes that we've been talking about. But they have, they're my perfect laboratory because I see what they do for each other. They are always answering each other's questions for free, bringing each other in on clients. And so it's this free sharing of information and expertise that builds your own credentials within the community. And that is so powerful. So back to a mistake you said. What are some of the mistakes, or what are some of the things they're doing right? Mistake would be, I don't want to work with anybody else because they're my competitors. I think that's maybe one of the biggest mistakes one could make. I have an expertise and I just do that expertise, and thank you very much, but I'm going to keep pulling that same lever because frankly, it's working for me. The clients are paying me, and I don't really, so I've always kind of looked at it, we have to look up and look around. There's a term I've been using, agility trumps ability. And what I mean by that is you can be really good at something. But if you only focus down on it, pretty soon it will become irrelevant. Data entry in the bookkeeping system, and now there's bank feeds. Well, what about that?
The best buggy whip manufacturer still doesn't make very much money anymore,
That's probably true. Yeah.
It's interesting when you compare what's happening in accounting firms and watching how it mirrors what's happening in small businesses. Adam Davidson, who's does NPR's Planet Money and writes for the New York Times, recently wrote an article and talked about the number of what we'll call mid-market firms, those businesses from maybe 10 to 100 employees, seem to be disappearing. There are more and more and more and more small businesses, very small, 2, 3, 4, 5 people, who are incredibly focused on what they do. And then there's the big companies that are, going to manufacture our iPhones and things. Yeah. But it's all those middle companies that had all of these departments, kind of like the POS and the outsource, all of those things. Yeah. They had all these departments, and now they're going, I don't need all those. Right. I'm going to be a hyper-focused small business. And if we have a whole bunch of hyper-focused small businesses, do we need a whole bunch of hyper-focused small CPA firms to service those businesses.
Yeah.
Is that what's going to happen?
Yeah, well, I actually might ask you that or the others about that because I think that's where it's going to go.
Well, you do a lot of
Firms.
work with small businesses
Yeah.
and research and stuff.
Yeah, we do what SMBs want. We're studying what the SMBs want. We actually went and asked the clients, "What do you want from your firm?"
What a shocker.
concept! But one of the things that is critical here for people to understand is that your clients really do want you to get much deeper involved in their business. And so this goes hand in hand with hyper-verticalization. If I'm going to be really involved in your business, then I better know what you do in your business and know it in a lot of depth. So our research is definitely proving that they want proactive advice from you. They don't want you to just simply produce the financial and the tax return. They've always needed that from the profession.
They want to stay out of jail.
That's true, right? So it's necessary but not sufficient. They
Right.
will switch out their accountant if they're not getting proactive strategic advice. So that ought to be telling those who, answering your question about what are mistakes, the mistakes are you're looking down, you're pulling the same lever, you're probably in the compliance world. I feel like a broken record on this in some
Right.
ways because I've been saying it for years. But if you just look up, there are a lot of products, technology, almost always technology drives these things. But it is beyond technology. It's the business model. How do you present yourself to the world who might hire your services? What kinds of models have you built that assume that you can't have access to the data? So think back, a tax business, certainly back when I was in the profession as a practitioner, I mean, it was absolutely shoebox and maybe some one-rate systems where the checks came in and we did write up in tax. Okay, so the assumption underlying all that is the data is not accessible by the firm. So that very fundamental assumption made us build models for how we do business, how we charge by the hour, how we have to get the things into our office 2 months in advance in order for us to get the tax return done, blah, blah, blah. Those assumptions were the reason we built the models we did. The assumptions are all now changing because we can the biggest assumption is access to data 24/7 from anywhere. And that allows us to just free up how we work. Now we can really go deep in the client. We can build a dashboard for them to have real-time access to their numbers and make real informed decisions, if you will, about managing their business based on the information that now we have served up for them. So it's a model shift. It's not just technology. It's a model shift.
We're thinking about the original instant question was, what are the mistakes that firms make? And I think you've hit on another part of that, because I know that the research that you've done and I've seen other people do is identified the mistakes that firms make regarding the fee concerns of their clients. So for years we have done compliance level work. So we do a tax return and a compiled financial statement and a sales tax return, and we deliver it to a client 6 weeks after the month end, and there's not, other than staying out of jail, there's really not a whole lot of value in that. The client certainly doesn't see any value in it, and we give them a bill. So they get a bill for $1,000, and they go, and they grumble about the bill.
Right.
Okay, so we then say, I can't do extra advisory, proactive management advisory services kinds of things for my client because they grumble about the
They don't
bill
wanna pay
over
for
here.
it.
They don't want to pay for it.
Yeah.
But when you go out and talk to the clients, they say, I'd happily pay for that. You send them a bill over there for $1,000 and they're thinking, boy, this is a great deal. It's worth even more than that.
Yeah.
So the mistake is that accountants underestimate the value that their clients put on those kind of trusted business advisor services.
Right.
And they say, my clients don't want that. And the clients say, that's what I want. And there's this huge disconnect.
And the clients further say, but my accountant doesn't want to provide that kind of service to me.
Exactly.
They only do the tax. So we've got this fundamental, what I call a service gap. It's what the SMBs do want, which is this proactive strategic advice, but what they believe their firm won't pay for them, or pay for, or provide for them. So
Call this, this is slide number 6.
yeah.
Okay, put slide number 6 up. So I want to talk a little bit about disruptive technologies and how disruptive technologies impact the profession and how we deliver services. It's the slide that's up there has this, what we call the future light cone, and the idea is, and it's very complicated, but the idea is the plane is where we exist, where we live today. That's today. You can look back in time, and if you look back 100 years ago and say, gee, Orville and Wilbur just invented the airplane, that's going to change the world. That's pretty, and it obviously has. And you could look out 100 years and say, well, gee, we're going to have, robots and nanotechnology and flying cars and all these things, and that's going to really change the world. But what about the next 5 years? What about the next 8 years? How is that going to impact us right now? And so the profession is now charged with trying to recognize these things and trying to say of this barrage of magic things that I'm seeing every day, which of them are worth my time and effort to identify, not necessarily go deep on, but at least identify and know, so that when they go talk to their client, let's say, for example, you have a client in the restaurant business and you're trying to be proactive and help them, and you go in and sit down and they say, I've been thinking about Open Table and Seamless, and I don't know if I should do one of those or not. And if you as the CPA say, what's that? You're not of very much value.
You're not that specialized.
You're
is
not
what
that
means.
specialized.
Yeah.
So now you don't have to know, and some of the people are out there saying, what's Open Table?
Well, that's fine,
And
yeah.
these are both apps that are kind of in the restaurant world that impact how, the business model. And you don't have to know everything about them, but you have to know that they exist. And that's one of the things, Doug, I think you've done a great job of over the years is kind of raising your hand to the profession and saying, hey, here's something really interesting. Earlier today, there was a session, that talked about expense management. The guys from he talked specifically about Tally, and there's a whole bunch of them in that genre, and it's huge in how it's going to change the world.
Yeah.
And you don't have to know everything about all of them. But as a profession, we have to drill down, and we have to start saying, we got to know enough about this where we can advise our clients. And then if you have to get deeper, what do? You go out and find one of those people who specialize in
process,
POS or whatever. But you have to do, I'm calling this search and deploy. You have to figure out what it is and then go out and help your client. Hold them by the hand, help your client.
Yeah. Well, this slide, if you could just show that again, because there's something about it that I notice when I see your slide here, Greg, and that is what I think a key point you're making is it's probably easier to see 100 miles out than 5 miles out.
Right.
So the 5 years out, which is what we're all kind of trying to predict today, because it's funny when you ask people, when are you going to retire? 5 years.
No,
Then next
5
year.
months.
And then they say 5 years again. Well, not you, Greg. We've already had that discussion. But anyway, what this is kind of showing the cone there is it's harder to see a little above the plane there than it is to predict what will eventually happen.
Right.
And I think that's where the profession is right now. I think for many years I have made it my role, and you have too, to show the profession where we're going. So we started with the cloud, is this new thing? And we said, well, there's hosting technology, which is just simply taking your Windows applications and putting them in a server that's accessible via the internet. And so now hosting is there. And then we keep saying, well, is hosting here forever, or is it only for 5 years, or is it 10 years? And we don't know. And so my advice to everyone is to there is no way to completely mitigate this, but it is the continuous learning, this continuous checking in, this continuous, just like you read the paper every day to figure out what the news is, you need to keep your finger on the pulse of what technologies are there, what are being deployed, search for them and deploy them, and test them and make sure that they're actually working out well for your clients. And I think people watching today are probably in this mode of, well, okay, what should I be doing now? Because I might have missed, some of them are saying, well, I started my practice 20 years ago, and I really haven't gone beyond paper-based systems. Oh my goodness, do they have a lot of work to do in a short amount of time? Because if you're still working on paper, there's almost no way you're going to get to this anytime, anywhere, this deeper levels of service.
We have this, this new word, this word called templosion, the word compressing time in an explosive manner. What's happened in the last 2 years is far greater than what's happened in the last 50 years.
Yes.
And it just keeps happening faster and faster. And I show that slide in, when I do presentations, and people will say, well, you're a futurist. And I go, I'm not a futurist, I'm about a 20-minutist. I'm trying to figure out what's going to happen, tomorrow. How do we react to this? But you're right, the profession looks at a lot of this and says, that's Buck Rogers.
Yeah, tell me when we get there.
Right. I've read about, somebody asked me the other day about Bitcoin. That's, how important really is that? Well, it's really important. It's not important that you know everything about it, but you better start thinking about some sort of cryptocurrency. What does that mean? What are the impacts? How it's going to affect things? Because it's very, very big. Right. It's a huge thing. And there's lots of things like that.
Yeah.
So for the accountants who are still 20 years back, are still working on paper systems or spreadsheets and OneWrites, but who still intend to stay in practice for the next 5 to 10 years, what should they do they can't just flip the switch and all of a sudden be 21st century. So how?
Yeah, that's the $64,000 question. How do I get there? I get it, Doug. I got to get somewhere new, somewhere up in that cone. I got to move forward. Well, what do I do first? Well, I give a presentation on 7 steps to moving to the cloud without creating a tornado. And it's basically where we take this and break it down into concrete steps. Some of the steps are, maybe obvious to you, maybe not. But one of the first ones is get paperless. And actually, I'd like to say less paper, because we'll never be paper. Look, you got some paper here. We'll always want a little bit of paper, but get paperless with things like payments. It's like, why are we sending checks in the mail? That is so fraud-ridden and inefficient. And
That's a good start.
Yeah, so that's like if you're not at least committed to that. So the question is, okay, I'll go less paper, Doug. How do I do that? Well, I say commit to the direction. And at my company, we started in 2008 down the direction. And you have this idea of, but look at all these file cabinets in the back room. What do I do? Do I have a big scanning party? It's kind of tempting. We'll do a scanning party, and I decided not to do that because it was a little unworkable. It would have taken us months to.
And it's silly.
And it's kind of silly. Anyway, is what I ultimately decided. I said, well, what we'll do is we'll commit to a direction of all new documents if they come on paper into the office, they get scanned and then filed electronically. And everything we print, we send electronically and save electronic copies. So basically, we stop the creation of paper as much as possible. And then we let those cabinets in the back room die their natural death, which is going to be 7, 10 years, whatever. Just last month, we had a ceremony of one of our last file cabinets getting
out the door.
put out the door. And it's kind of a fun thing to see the evolution of your firm in that way. So that's one thing.
I love the idea of slowing it down and doing directionally. The metaphor that I use when I talk about this is the first rule of hole digging is stop. Just stop creating things. And Gail, you might appreciate this. When I had your job and I was running the magazine, we did some research, and I went to a selection of firms, and we randomly pulled files out of their file cabinet, and we looked at all of the stuff with the partners. Said, let's look at this file and figure out how much of the paper that's in this file was produced on a laser printer in your office. And it was about 75% of the stuff that was in the file was stuff that we had created ourselves. So it lived in a perfectly digital world until we made it analog and put it in a file and then try to figure out how to be paperless. If you do that, speaking in paper, you've got another CPE code that we have to do.
Yeah, I'm just a hint here.
Speaking of paper.
Speaking of paper, I see it.
All right.
Doug, I want to go back to one of the things you said about not going beyond just knowing what's out there and actually like eating the dog food. And obviously you can't do this with everything if it's a lot of money, etc. But we had a session earlier today with Bill.com and the two firms that they said, well, we want to have our clients use it, but we would not make our clients use it until we used it ourselves for 90 days and played around with it. Now that's a lot of work and you're training yourself and you're learning, but if you can say, I actually touched it and I recognized some problems and I can even say some of the glitches with the system, that's great. So how do you go about
it's hard like for a firm to say, well, I want to specialize in point of sale, so I'm going to get a point of sale register in my accounting firm. It's just, you're right. However, something like Bill.com, great thing you can first, in fact, I did that myself. In 2008, I embraced that and I said, I just have to use this because I have to be able to talk about it. And so you're right, you can't do that with all of them, but I absolutely recommend that you have a laboratory environment, whatever you're going to use for that. Maybe you've got a special server in the cloud or in the back room or whatever where you just experiment and you make time and effort and dedication of people resource to, okay, we're going to evaluate a new expense reporting product. Okay, so we're going to create, maybe you can get some guinea pig clients, who are, somebody that needs it, but is a relatively small use case that you can try it out with. That'll help you work with the vendor, see if it's going to work out. Develop best practices around your templatization, if you will, of the solution. Because one of the things I want all of us to be really good at is best practices. Don't just read, I call it brochureware, from the vendor and say, oh, it does those things. And then tell the client, well, it does that. And then not really.
Yeah, not so much.
And I, unfortunately, or I guess it's just the case of the world we're living in, there's a lot of products out that aren't really ready for prime time. And at this leader group, that's one of the things we make our job, is to vet products and to really dive in and really help the vendors see when it's not there. Greg and I do a lot of this when we talk to vendors, and we think we know a little more than they do, but often they know a lot more about that marketplace. But there's such a mixture of what product developers need in order to succeed. And one is they have to obviously be good development core people. But they also need to understand the business customer, and then the angle of the accountant in the whole mix often is what's missed. Because so often your end user small business doesn't really care or appreciate best practices for streamlining the accounting process to get proper, accurate financial statements and then tax returns. And say sales tax, for example. If they don't understand what the implications of sales tax is at the transaction level and get it properly put through the whole system, you really got a mess. And it's harder to implement a system that does that wrong than to not implement it at all. So that's where we come in.
So we started the whole conversation around this, what are mistakes that firms make, that practitioners make. And I think there's another very fundamental mistake that many of us have made, and that's the idea of cooperation and how we cooperate with other firms, like with the Sleater Group and with all the other organizations, with the state societies, with the ASCPA, all of those things. But we've had kind of a siloed world where we kind of stayed inside, and we didn't reach out very much. We had a little bit of almost a mistrust of sharing with the guy down the street because they were our competitor.
Yeah.
And so as we've moved to this community in the sky, the very technology that provides things like Tally and Bill.com and Evelare, all of these magic things that now exist, also provides a community that's different from the communities that we used to have. The community is now this internet-based community, but as a profession, we don't all figure that out right away, and our level of expectation is different. So I've had farms and I've talked to, and I said, well, have you considered going, there's a user group, for example, for such and such a thing, or go to the Sleater bulletin board, or go to your state society bulletin, or go somewhere and find this. And I've had people say, well, I went to this bulletin board and I posted a question up there, and I went back 6 hours later and there wasn't a single answer.
Nobody answered me.
Yeah.
So I said, well, giving up.
So I moved into a new house and I went out and asked people to come and help me paint my garage, and nobody came over. Well, go help somebody else first. Yeah. So we have to go out and we're in this together. We have to go out and help one another.
Yeah.
In the engineering world, when you have a problem at the engineering level with a program, these engineers do amazing work of writing. Just go to the internet and type in your problem, and you get page after page of detailed reports on how to solve it. You don't get that in our world, although we are getting better.
Better and better,
but,
yeah.
If you
but
think
there's wrong
about,
stuff out there,
yeah,
too.
if you can just reach out and help somebody because you think what you just discovered, there's lots of other people that are suffering with that. So when you discover that in order to make this link to this, you have to push F4 or whatever the solution is, then write that up.
Yeah.
And post
Put
it
it in
and
a
say,
blog.
this is my experience.
Yeah. If you could put up slide 15, there's something that is a little bit related to what you just said. But if you want a good book to read that will, I think, wake you up, this is actually an old book. It was written in 1998 by Andy Grove. It's called Only the Paranoid Survive. And it really informs a lot my point on agility trumping ability. In this book, Andy talks about, now he was the chairman of Intel Corporation for years, president and CEO of Intel. And when he wrote this book, his company was already 20, 30 years old or so, and one of the most successful companies on earth. And their company had singularly built the whole semiconductor industry and revolutionized so much of what we now do in our computing devices. So his company, he was at the head of this company, and the culture was, we know everything, and we know what to do and how to do it and when to do it, and we will release products when we decide to, and we will then put them out there, and our customers will want them. But he never asked the customers what they wanted, because they didn't know. How could
If it was a good idea, we'd have thought of it.
We would have thought of that. That's right. So along about this book, there was some, they were having some struggles, and so he kind of realized that what he needed was information from the outside, a lot more information from the outside. And he talks about strategic inflection points. And while Intel was creating strategic inflection points on the computer industry when mainframes were dominant and PCs came in, it was because of Intel they created this strategic inflection point for IBM and the others like that. And he talks about how a strategic inflection point doesn't really differentiate amongst those who it affects and doesn't affect. And the career inflection point is another piece he puts where employees within a firm or firm owners themselves, these inflection points don't differentiate how good you are at whatever it is you're doing. So you might have been a really good buggy whip manufacturer, right, and a strategic inflection point can hit, and you won't even notice it if you're just looking down. So I just feel like this book is a great way to keep yourself that agile attitude within, so that your firm does thrive and doesn't go down by doing too much ability and not enough agility.
So as an example of this, Doug, I would pop up slide number 7, if you would. I want to take just a couple of seconds, and we use this as an example. This isn't meant to be definitive, because there are all kinds of examples of things that firms need to understand. They don't have to be deep, but this whole idea of peer lending and crowdsourcing and Kickstarter, and we're not going to talk about all of these things specifically, but there's a whole change going on in how small businesses are financed. Traditionally, CPA firms took their client to the commercial bank by the hand, and we were very involved in that. And all of a sudden, it's happening outside of that. So the whole world is changing. We've got now these baby IPOs, and a new world there, and we've got all kinds of things around what's the taxation of, if your client goes out and raises a couple $100,000 on a Kickstarter project. What is that?
Is that
income?
taxable?
Is that equity? Is that deferred income?
Yeah.
There are firms out there who are specializing in that. What a shocker! But this is one of. I mean, there are literally hundreds of areas where you have to sit up and say, okay, I need to understand just enough about this so that when it comes up, I know. It's kind of like the tax code. You don't have to know everything about it, but you have to know when you have to go look something up.
Yeah, or find another true expert that you bring in on the client.
Exactly.
Do you guys have anything final to say? Because we're going to wrap up here.
Well, I would maybe just wrap the final thing I want you to challenge yourself to think about is, what is your value? When you get ready to sell your firm or sell out to your partners or whatever, when you're building a firm today, if you're not building it based on what your clients in the future will want, or even today's clients want, then your value, even that you have assumed when you built it would be there, it may not even be there today. So I hate to scare you, but I just do want you to really think this is about you. It is about your ultimate paycheck on the exit plan for your own self in your firm. So make sure you're thinking this way. If not for your own self today, for your grandchildren someday.
And I guess what I would end with is I would challenge the profession to stretch, to reach, to go out and do the trusted business advisor kinds of activities that your clients want, because frankly, those are fun. They're professionally rewarding. I didn't get a master's degree and sit for the most difficult professional examination in the world to grind out a sales tax return. I wanted to do things that were professionally rewarding. Your clients want it. It's fun and it's exciting, and that's where the profession is going. Don't be scared to reach out and do what Doug calls so eloquently change leadership. Go out and be a leader and hold your client by the hand and move him forward, and we will see all of you in the trusted business advisor world of the future.